Hey, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the channel in general. And this is our first web development blog for game development that I'm putting up to kind of highlight the journey from beginning to an end of a project and to kind of go over all of the hurdles and obstacles and decisions that come from seeing a project to completion. So we recently reached a milestone in our development. We completed our very first milestone in the project we're going to talk about today. And that milestone was called the Granite Milestone. And what I like to call it the Granite Milestone for is because all it's doing is establishing a base framework to have everything else build upon. And I find that typically there's going to be several of these framework builds that happen before you even start to see a game show up. So what I'm going to demo today isn't going to be much. There's no game here, but they are starting to create the foundational pieces, much like when you're building a house. We built the foundation and then we move on and start putting up the walls, etc. later. So the next milestone is called the timber milestone, and that is beginning the outer walls, and it'll build on what we've created here. Now this was a 3-month journey into getting this first milestone completed, and kind of go over what the project even is in general, and discuss a little bit about what you're going to be looking at here. So this project's done in Unreal Engine 5. Originally, this was a project done up in Unity, and I was creating it for another company's miniatures war game. And that fell through. And when that fell through, about that same time, Unity had begun doing some things. They had cut out their tech demos. They were just moving in a direction that I wasn't really happy with. And so I figured it was time to start delving into Unreal a little bit deeper. Now, at the time, my work required me to work in Unreal Engine, and I was working in other people's games to help add testing and whatnot to it. So it was kind of a double pronged initiative. I wanted to learn it for myself to get better at it myself, but I also needed to do it better for work to understand it. So I spent almost the entire 2022 with my nose in a book learning Unreal 5 just to get somewhat familiar with it. And that took the form of a lot of different Udemy courses from start to finish, GameDev.tv courses from start to finish, and some books just to kind of go over all the different objects. Because when you sit down in Unreal, it's very complicated. It's like sitting in an airplane cockpit and looking at all of the instrumentation in front of you and then being expected to fly the plane and land the plane. There's just a lot going on in Unreal. So this game is one of my, what I call a capstone project in my life, or a passion project, as you will. So there's two different things in my life that have been a constant in terms of like what I love. The first one's heavy metal music, and the second one is tactical war games. Both of these things I have done and participated in for decades. So this is kind of a love letter to both heavy metal and tactical war games. This is a game set in the heavy metal universe and is a tactical sci-fi / fantasy war game. It's turn-based, and it is designed to be, it is my answer to what I would do if I could design a tabletop war game. I have no interest in actually designing a tabletop war game for commercial use, simply because I'm not interested in having to go through the logistics of storing rule books or holding miniatures and sending those out and having to sell those. And I'm not interested in any of that. But what this project is there's going to be a rule book. You will be able to play this with miniatures, and it allows me to create the game in a playable state in a video game format. Now, turn-based games aren't exactly the most popular things, but I really don't care, because I want to be true to what a turn-based game is, and I'm not looking to create another Total Warhammer or anything like that. I think the RTS scene has enough games And for me as an indie developer, I am the sole developer here, the sole animator, the sole everything. I don't want to spend a lot of time on something that requires a lot more effort than what I can do as an individual. I think turn-based games were very popular when I was coming up, and I'd like to return, to that. And a tabletop war game is turn-based, so we're going to stay true to that. Now I'm going to show you this running. We'll kind of go over some of the features of what the Granite Milestone did, and then I'm going to kind of step through what that code looks like. And I'd like to also just address some things like if you're trying to get into Unreal, some of the things that I've run into. Now this project is almost entirely done in C++ code. I am not interested in blueprinting unless I have to. And there are some things where you're kind of, they kind of want you to use blueprints for a few things, and I use them as I need to, but I prefer coding. I think that for me, I can read and visualize what's going on a lot better in code than I can with the blueprints, because the blueprints can get kind of ugly and messy and nasty real quick. I've had to step through even big studios blueprint mess, and it can be overwhelming. And granted, code can probably also be overwhelming, but for me, it's just I'm more comfortable with code. I've been doing it for a very long time. So what you're looking at here is nothing more than the the turn-based overhead template, but I've commandeered it for my purposes. So we pretty much removed all of the code that Unreal gave us to start this project with, and this is all my stuff. So the first thing that needed done, the first system you're seeing is a camera, and this camera lets me move in, look at the objects, pan around. We're not going to be in something like this container here. This is just a sandbox that lets me create mechanics essentially and test them. The real table is going to be a battlefield, and it's going to have nature settings, and it's going to look a lot different than this. So everything you're looking at here is not polished at all. These are just stand-ins. And for me, that was one of the big challenges, because I have always had a hard time with stand-ins. I always want it to look as good as possible, even in the prototype stage. And that, it makes it go longer. It makes your development go longer, and it's just not realistic, to be honest. So we're using the Unreal mannequin. So it comes with a female and a male mannequin. That's what all these are. And its default look is this guy right here. And you saw when I clicked on him, I get a little card will pop up just tell me what he is. He's my prototype infantry, his type, and this will be where his stat block goes. And if I don't like that, I can go ahead and cancel. I can shrink that up if I don't like how big it is. Again, this is not final graphics placements. This is just a card that throws up on the screen. He's outlined in blue because this is a neutral. This guy right here doesn't belong to me, but he's an ally. So I shouldn't be able to kill him, and I shouldn't be able to interact with him at all. But he's there as an ally. Now, I've added the ability to take that mannequin and have material instances so we can customize how they look, so we can have uniform colors. So you can see my people are blue and black. So this is my warrior. He's my proto-infantry. He's green. It means I can select him. Notice his box down here lights up. Over here we have our unit state, meaning I can switch from range to melee. Of course, these guys don't have ranged weapons, so this is grayed out, so clicking on it doesn't do anything. And then right here we have a little target renderer. This is just a little camera that is going to float in front of him. There's only one in the scene, and it's just going to capture his image just to kind of get me who I'm looking at. All right. And again, the weapons are nothing more than, they're just little cheap weapons that they have no effects or anything on them. These guys right here have a slightly different pattern. So they're still blue and black, but you can see a little bit different. They're carrying a ranged weapon, which is a staff. I actually have some ideas for the first factions ranged attacks from some older 1980s movies. I'm looking forward to getting some animators in to help me make that happen. But here's a staff. So if I click on him, notice lets me select him, and we see that we're in range mode because he's got a ranged weapon. But I can make this guy go into melee mode. So now he's in melee mode, and we can switch him back to range mode. So we got the animations in place to allow for that to happen. And the enemies, well, they're red. So again, I can customize my uniforms however I need, to the best of the ability anyway. So I really feel customization is important. And if I click on these guys, I can still get their stats and everything, which is important because I need to be able to display all that information, but they're red, so they can't do anything. Now, if I select this range guy, I can move him by right-clicking on a point, and he'll move there. There are no current rules in this, so that means I can essentially have them move across the table if I want. Part of the Timber milestone will be to start implementing not only their stats, so I'll be able to say how much you can move in a turn, but it'll also start enforcing that. So if I go beyond what he can move, I'll get a note. It'll show me something that says you can't move here. But if I right-click on an enemy while I'm in range mode, he's going to shoot. And this guy right here is set to die after one turn, or one hit. And this guy's set to die after 3 hits, just to test certain things. So if I right-click here, he goes ahead and kills that guy. And so he falls and he drops his weapon. We can also do that in melee mode. So let's move him up here, and we're going to charge this guy and attack. And bam, hits him once. So remember, he can be hit 3 times. So we're going to hit him twice and hit him a 3rd time, and he falls and dies and drops his weapon. So we have the ability to move around. We have the ability to attack. I also added a dev console to allow me to create cheat commands. So say, for example, I want to kill my own guy here. I can go into the Unreal console by hitting the tilde button and then say kill selected units, which is a command that I've programmed that when I do that, notice my guy dies and he's removed from my available units box and he's dead. All right, so that's the prototype. That's what we've spent 3 months on getting ready, getting that framework ready. So obviously there's still a lot of work to be done here. But let's look at now, just to kind of show you the scope of what that is. What does that look like? I said before that all of this is done in code because I prefer coding over blueprinting. And what you're looking at here, this is a class diagram of all of the different objects that exist in the game that have been created. So here's my character, and the character implements all of these interfaces. I'm not going to, in this video, go over what any of this stuff means, but interfacing and abstraction is very important in software development. This object gets passed around quite a bit because it's one of the central figures, or units, excuse me. This character class represents the pawns you see, the little guys. You see we have weapons that are classes, we have the battlefield HUD, we have a variety of custom data types which take the form of enums that are used. And then on top of that, we just have a lot of different helper classes like the camera, etc. And I also feel it's pretty important to create a development document that goes over your expectations, how the classes are laid out, and so forth. Just because as you're developing a game, even if you're solo or if you're on a large team, you're going to forget certain things that you did a year ago. And so these documents help remind me of expected flows. So here's my primary flow in this game. It's simply, you've got a game mode at the very top, which holds all the rules of the game. It pushes information down to a game state object, which holds the data, basically who's alive, what the scores are, what's the conditions of the current game, and so forth. That pushes down to a player controller. Now, this player controller really controls this camera object. So in a top-down role-playing game, you are the camera. You're not possessing any of the pawns. But the player controller also pushes information down to the character objects. There's arrays of character objects, and it can interact with character objects that are assigned to it. Though it has visibility to all of them, it's smart enough to know if you are on its team or its faction, or if you're someone else, such as the neutral guy or the enemy. So this just lays out some different diagrams, the interface again that I can talk to make the character do whatever it is I want to do. Again, interfaces are very important. I would recommend if you're a software developer and you don't understand what these are for, do some research, and maybe I'll do a video on why we use interfaces or why they're so important. But it's a lot easier to focus on aspects of a giant class and what it can do, such as iMovable, which is just going to expose the commands that let this thing move, than it is to care about all the other commands that are in this interface that make up this class. It's not mandatory or anything, but it does make development easier, and the abstraction helps with testing and a few other things. All right, so there we have it. Very quick, 15-minute or 16-minute or whatever video, kind of going over the first milestone in Unreal. It's exciting to move into the next phase and to have that shape out. I know I post animated GIFs and whatnot to some various sites just to kind of highlight progress, but I am looking forward to getting this into a playable state. Hopefully by the end of the year, have some type of a game beta that you can at least create army rosters with and play. I will say the multiplayer component on this is going to be the most difficult and will be the last thing that I work on because of all of the different hassles that you have to keep in mind. So if you have any comments, please post below. If you have any questions, I'm glad to go over anything in terms of game development and my journey through Unreal. Unreal's a challenge for sure, but I think it's a challenge well worth it. It is an industry standard in gaming. It's also becoming an industry standard in animation. And honestly, I believe that's well deserved because what you can do in Unreal blows me away. So get into it. It takes some time to get into it. It took me about a year to really get comfortable, but once you get going, really the sky's the limit. So thank you guys. I'll be looking forward to posting some things soon. Until then, stay safe and happy coding.